Well, hey, you guys. Here we are, once again, doing another book review. So, any of you guys that have been around here for any length of time at all will know that I absolutely love Grady Hendrix, very prolific author. I've read and reviewed a bunch of his books on here: Horror Store, My Best Friend's Exorcism, Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, and the Final Girls Support Group. I've also read his nonfiction book, which I really recommend, which is called Paperbacks from Hell. I didn't review that one because I usually just do fiction on here, but that is a really awesome book too. But I was kind of browsing through Books a Million the other day, and I came across one of his books that I hadn't read, and that I also don't hear as many people talking about as maybe they talk about some of his other ones. This was actually his 2018 novel, which is called We Sold Our Souls. Now, because the premise of this one involves music, like a deal with the devil, kind of, and sort of like tangentially the whole like satanic panic era kind of thing, this kind of seemed right up my alley. So I was like, yeah, I'm totally going to buy this and read it. Now, I will say that this book, like all of Grady Hendrix's books, like pretty much rules. All of his books rule. I think I connected with it slightly less than some of the other ones, but like I said, that's really not saying all that much. That's really not that much of a criticism, because all his books are so good that, this one I think I connected slightly less, but it was just like a little fraction of like a thing. So it's like, don't take that as like too much of a criticism, because I still really, I adored this book just like most of his other ones, and I would totally recommend it to anybody who, likes Hendrix's stuff in general, and especially people that are also like really into heavy metal or any kind of like musical subgenre like that. Now, I probably mentioned this before in some of my other reviews of his stuff, but Grady Hendrix is actually really good at writing very compelling female lead characters, which is something that, like a lot of male authors are not really that good at, or are not really like all that known for. And honestly, this novel is no exception. So our main protagonist is a young woman named Chris Pulaski, and she's kind of like this working class heavy metal guitarist who kind of at one time was sort of like maybe poised on the edge of stardom. Like her band, which is called Dirt Work, but with U's, with umlauts, you know what I mean? Like, because it's heavy metal. They were actually going to open for Slayer like back in the 90s. So they were just right on the cusp of being super famous. However, after that, it kind of all went horribly wrong. So nowadays, Chris is in her 40s, and she's still kind of stuck in this just real like dead end, meth-addled town that she grew up in. She still lives in her parents' kind of disintegrating house. Her parents are dead, I believe, but she still lives in the house. And the neighborhood they live in, which used to be kind of like a nice working middle class neighborhood, it's kind of like slowly been going to seed. You know what I mean? So she's kind of like the only person left, like pretty much from back in that day. She still drives her dad's old 20-year-old like hand-me-down car. Is drowning in credit card debt. And she works night shifts at this kind of like crappy Best Western hotel. And one of the things that she deals with all the time is this guy that lives in the hotel, and he just like always comes out and like rants at her and like pees on the front desk and shit like that. So obviously her life is taken a turn, let's put it that way. And she hasn't really done anything creative like in a really long time. Like she hasn't picked up a guitar, she hasn't written a song, like she's kind of put her guitar away and hasn't done anything like that. Now, by contrast, her former bandmate from Dirt Work, whose name is Terry Hunt, who was the singer, he is actually one of the most successful musicians the world has ever seen. He actually formed a band called Coffin, with a K, and he operates under the kind of guise of a figure, like a character, called the Blind King. Now, Terry has more money and more power than Chris can even imagine. Chris is actually pretty bitter about Terry's success, and has been for quite a long time, and not least of which, not just because of sour grapes, but because she believes pretty much that Terry kind of like ditched the band back in the day when they were just right on the cusp of becoming famous, and basically like stole all her music and like all her ideas and like used that as a jumping off point to be like super famous himself. But it seems like she's kind of like, oh, well, whatever. She's still kind of mad about it. She's not really doing anything about it. But at the beginning of the story, her fury about this whole situation gets compounded because she starts seeing billboards everywhere and like radio ads and things like that, and that are kind of plugging Coffin's big farewell tour, and it's going to be like the musical event of the century. So she's just kind of like, well, that's not good, is it? Now, because she's, like I said, in kind of like a dead-end, miserable life, and it's just going nowhere, so Chris decides at this juncture, because she's reminded of all of that again, that she's going to get to the bottom of what happened with her former band back in the 90s and how she sort of like ended up in this predicament that she's in. See, what happened was back in the 1990s, like not long after, like almost immediately after the Slayer gig, Terry, the singer, and the manager of Dirtwork, whose name was, what was his name? Rob, I think was his name. They presented the band members, which was Chris, a guy named Tuck, a guy named Bill, and a guy named Scotty Rocket. And they presented them with what seemed like kind of lucrative contracts, right? Problem was, the contracts were essentially asking the members of Dirtwork to give up all of the rights to the band and to their music to Terry, like exclusively. Now, he was going to give each of them like a big hefty fee, but he was essentially going to be like, well, you guys can't, pretty much do anything anymore. You don't have the rights to the band. You don't have the rights to any of the music you wrote. You don't have any of that kind of stuff. Now, all the other guys in the band, they were pissed off about this, but they sort of like were grudgingly open to these terms because it was a lot of money that he was offering. But Chris was absolutely livid. I mean, she pretty much accused Terry of selling out and of betraying them, and she just absolutely refused to go along with his whole scheme. However, from this fateful occasion, which all the band members just refer to as contract night with capital letters, Chris has a really big gap in her memory. Like, after she basically said, "I'm not signing that," and stormed out of the house, there's like a 4-hour period where she can't remember anything. Like, she can't remember what happened after that. And actually none of the other guys can actually remember what happened that night either. But Chris suspects that whatever it was that occurred in these missing hours, it was kind of like the beginning of the downward spiral that just ended up like sucking her and her bandmates down, and also kind of like the start of Terry's, meteoric rise to mega stardom. Now, these were like parallel events that Chris knows are linked somehow, but she doesn't know exactly how. So after that whole premise and the history of that is like established, the book kind of becomes something like a road trip sort of story, because Chris pretty much like abandons her lame life and sort of attempts to reconnect with her former bandmates. And she's trying to convince them to come with her to confront Terry at his big final show in Las Vegas. Like, he's hosting like this big festival with like all these other bands and stuff like that, like out in the desert. And so she's trying to get all her other bandmates to come out and like figure out, like get to the bottom of it and confront him and see if they can sort some shit out, you know what I mean? And find out what exactly it was that happened on contract night and why they can't remember any of it. Now, this is kind of harder than it sounds, because the other guys from Dirtwork actually kind of hate her because they sort of just see her as this troublemaker who refused to go along with the whole sellout. And so they still are kind of bitter about her, like, messing up their gig or whatever. And so she pretty much has like an upward climb when she tries to contact them again, because a lot of them don't want to see her. And what's even worse than that is that as the events of the book unfold, it starts to become very obvious that something supernatural, evil, and really like far-reaching and kind of far beyond human understanding is going on behind this entire ugly affair. You know what I mean? So along the way, Chris ends up having to tap back into her like creative energy, I guess, like to battle these overwhelming forces that she's encountering. And of particular significance in that regard is this concept album called Troglodyte that she wrote back in the day. And she wrote it and she thought it was their best stuff, but then Terry and the manager back in the 90s wouldn't allow the band to release it for reasons which are eventually unveiled. Now, as a sideline, there's also like another minor character whose name is Melanie, and she's actually a Coffin fan, and she's trying to get across the country to see the show in Vegas. So she only turns up kind of near the beginning of the story and then toward the end, but she almost kind of serves not just like as a bookend character, but something as like a little bit of a mirror to Chris's character in a way, because she's like another young woman that's trying to make her way like in the very male-dominated metal scene, but she's kind of like more of an appreciator, like coming at it from the fan perspective, whereas Chris is actually like a creator who, you know, essentially had her best ideas like ripped off and undermined by a dude who just wanted money and fame and didn't really care who he fucked over to get it. So like I said, I mean, like all of Grady Hendrix's books, all of which I've just loved unreservedly, this one is also, it's just a blast. It's fun, it's gory, and just the whole thing is great. It's also, like a lot of his stuff, just very genuinely heartfelt, and I think in particular this will resonate really hard with anybody that's into any kind of musical subgenre, like, you know, is really hardcore into any kind of musical subgenre, like, and anyone who's ever felt like whatever kind of music they're into has like really pulled them through difficult times or saved their lives or something like that. This is very much, I mean, he very much takes heavy metal, like, or any kind of like subgenre of music that, you know, saves your life or something like that. He takes that very, very seriously, and I really liked that. Also, and this is kind of like a little bit of stuff that's kind of going on underneath, but I think this is also kind of a little bit of a subtle exploration of some of the struggles of poverty, maybe, and like how easy it is to essentially parcel out tiny portions of your soul just to get by or just to obtain, you know, comforts or luxuries, until one day, you know, when you're much older, you find that your entire soul, like meaning your passion or your dream or your ultimate goal for life or whatever, is gone. Like you don't have it anymore. And then like the sad thing about that is that you find like you really don't give a shit anymore that it's gone. You know what I mean? And this is kind of like a heavy concept, but I think Grady Hendrix always comes at things with such a light touch that even though these themes are there, they don't really feel intrusive or like he's shoehorning them in or anything like that. It's just something that's kind of rumbling under the surface that you can kind of like pick up on or not as you feel like it. So yeah, I mean, We Sold Our Souls pretty much has anything you could ask for, like in a horror novel. It's really entertaining. It's like epic in scale. It's gross. It's funny. It's badass. Like a lot of the characters are really badass. And it has really great characters that you actually really care about. And it has like a really earnest, you know, beating heart at the center of it. And that makes the stakes of the story seem like that much bigger, that much more earth-shattering. So I think metal fans in particular will probably love this, but anybody who's into, like I said, any kind of like musical subgenre to any great degree like that will probably really relate to it hard, because I certainly did. And really anybody that just likes really fast-paced road trip kind of horror that has these sort of like big conspiratorial, like sinister satanic forces like as the antagonists, I think they should really dig it as well. So that will do it for this Tomes of Terror. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Please like, share, subscribe, and all of that other kind of stuff, and I will see you guys again on the next one. Bye.